Welcome to another deep dive where we're going to be unpacking a story that kind of took the internet by storm.
Yeah.
It's a seemingly ordinary flight that turned into this whole national debate.
hmm
And our source material for this is really interesting. It's a single long-form narrative that kind of reads like a news story, but it's also blended with elements of like a fictional novel.
Oh, wow.
So get ready for a wild ride as we explore what happens when the son of a very polarizing political figure finds himself at the center of controversy,
Right.
and how a simple hat sparked such a heated debate.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about the story is how it really taps into those pre-existing societal fault lines that we all kind of have.
Right.
We're primed to react very strongly to symbols like the MAGA hat, and this story really plays on that.
It does.
It forces us to examine our own biases and reactions, and I think that's part of why it went so viral.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's set the scene.
Okay.
The story starts with Barron Trump boarding a flight from Phoenix to L.A. He's casually dressed, but he's wearing a MAGA hat.
Okay.
And right away, you can sense this tension on the plane.
Right.
Some passengers are whispering, others are
Yeah.
giving him these, like, disapproving looks.
Yeah.
There are even a few teenagers snapping pictures of him.
Wow.
But amidst all of this, Barron remains totally calm.
It's interesting, the narrative deliberately sets up this contrast, right? Like the charged atmosphere versus his composure.
Yes.
Almost like he was expecting. It makes you wonder if he was fully aware of the potential for controversy or if he was genuinely surprised by the reactions.
Yeah, I know. And it speaks to how charged the political climate is,
Hmm.
that even a teenager wearing a hat can become like a lightning rod for controversy.
Yeah, totally agree.
So Barron settles into his seat, seemingly ready for a quiet flight. But then a flight attendant approaches him
Okay.
and politely asks him to remove the hat.
Okay.
She frames it as a courtesy to other passengers,
Okay.
to avoid making them uncomfortable,
Right.
not as an outright rule.
That-
So it's not like you have to take this off. It's more like, hey, can you do this for the comfort of others?
This is where the story starts to explore this idea of like social etiquette, right? Those unwritten rules of conduct that we often take for granted. In this case, the flight attendants kind of appealing to Barron's sense of social responsibility, suggesting that his personal expression might be infringing on the comfort of others.
That's a great point, because it really does raise questions about where we draw the line between like individual freedom
Yes,
and the potential impact of our actions on others.
exactly.
So how does Barron respond to this request?
Yeah.
Well, he politely but firmly refuses. He states his belief in what the hat represents
Okay.
and emphasizes that he's not causing a disruption.
Interesting. So he's basically asserting his right to express himself,
He is.
setting the stage for a clash of perspectives.
Exactly. And it's a classic example of what psychologists call reactants.
Oh, tell me more.
Okay, so it's that instinctive pushback we feel when our freedom is threatened or perceived to be threatened.
Okay.
And it's especially strong in adolescents who are already navigating issues of identity and autonomy.
Right.
So it's not surprising that Barron, even though he's calm, isn't backing down.
Makes sense.
And that refusal is where the tension on the plane really starts to escalate.
Oh, boy.
The murmurs turn into debates.
Yeah.
Passengers start taking sides.
Wow.
You can practically feel the unease in the cabin.
The story does such a good job of conveying how quickly a seemingly minor incident can polarize people,
Doesn't it?
like forcing them to confront their own beliefs about free speech and symbolism and social responsibility.
Absolutely. And it's like a microcosm of the larger societal divisions we see playing out like every day.
Oh, 100%.
And that's what makes this narrative so compelling. It's not just about a boy in a hat.
Right.
It's about how we as a society navigate these complex issues of individual rights versus the common good.
Exactly.
So as the tension builds, the lead flight attendant steps in
Oh, no.
and gives Barron an ultimatum. Remove the hat or leave the flight.
Wow. Imagine the pressure in that moment, being a teenager and having to make that decision.
I know, right?
Conform to the pressure of the group or stand by your convictions, even if it means facing consequences.
Yeah, and this is where the story takes a really interesting turn.
Okay.
Instead of arguing or escalating the situation, Barron calmly gathers his belongings,
Really?
head held high, still wearing that hat, and exits the plane.
Talk about making a statement.
I know, it's a powerful image, right?
It is.
That quiet defiance, the refusal to be bullied or silenced. And of course, in today's hyper-connected world, this is where things really explode.
Right, because this is a textbook example of how social media can amplify and distort events, turning them into symbols for larger cultural battles.
Yeah.
And it happens so fast before Barron even reaches the airport. Passengers are posting about the incident, videos are going viral, and suddenly a seemingly isolated event is trending nationwide.
It's crazy, right? So it's amazing how one event can become a social media firestorm these days.
Right.
But what's interesting is how Barron handles it. He doesn't get swept up in the drama.
Yeah. Right.
Instead, he sends out this surprisingly composed tweet from the airport.
Well, composed is an interesting word choice there. Some might say it was calculated, a deliberate move to control the narrative.
That's a good point. It definitely seems strategic.
Yeah.
He just says he was removed for wearing a hat, emphasizes that there was no shouting or conflict, and hints that there's a larger conversation to come.
Right.
It feels very measured, like he's choosing his words carefully.
Absolutely. And that hint, that promise of more to come, it's brilliant.
It is.
It leaves everyone hanging, wondering what he's going to do next.
Totally.
And it shifts the power dynamic, you know?
Taking
control of the narrative and refusing to be just labeled as a victim or a provocateur.
He's basically using social media to frame the narrative on his own terms.
Exactly.
Which is pretty savvy for a teenager.
I was going to say.
But meanwhile, the media frenzy is in overdrive.
Oh, yeah.
News outlets are all over the story, framing it through their usual lenses. Conservative outlets are calling it an attack on free speech.
Right.
While liberals are debating the limits of personal expression in public spaces. And then you have social media going absolutely nuts.
It's the perfect example of how quickly an event becomes a symbol for pre-existing societal divides.
Isn't it?
Suddenly, everyone's projecting their own beliefs and biases onto the situation.
Yeah.
And the actual details of what happened become almost secondary.
It's true. It's like the incident itself becomes less important than what it represents to different groups of people.
Exactly.
And just as the debate is at a fever pitch, a passenger's video surfaces.
Oh, wow.
Of the entire confrontation. And guess what?
What?
It shows Barron exactly as he described.
Really?
Calm, respectful, not causing a disturbance. It totally flips the script.
That video is a game changer.
It is.
It provides visual evidence that contradicts some of the initial narratives, forces people to reevaluate their positions, and it also raises an interesting question.
What's that?
How much of our initial judgments are based on assumptions and preconceived notions?
It's a lot to think about. This whole thing highlights how easily misinformation can spread and how important it is to be critical of what we see and hear, especially online.
Absolutely.
Now, at this point, everyone's waiting for Barron's next move.
Yeah.
The anticipation is insane.
Right.
And then he announces a press conference.
Okay, but not just any press conference.
Right.
He chooses this low-key, almost humble venue.
He does.
Deliberately shifting the focus away from the spectacle and onto his message.
Yeah.
It's strategic, highlighting his desire for genuine dialogue rather than just fanning the flames of controversy.
And dialogue he delivers.
He does.
Barron steps up to the podium, composed and mature beyond his years.
It's amazing how a simple call for unity can resonate so deeply.
It is.
It speaks to a deeper human need for connection and belonging, especially in a world that feels so polarized.
You're right.
Research shows that humans are wired for connection, and when those connections are threatened, we feel anxious, angry, all these negative emotions.
Yeah. Barron's message, perhaps unintentionally, tapped into that longing for unity and belonging.
Yeah, and the idea of choosing respect over resentment really struck a chord with people. Why do you think that is?
And he does it so eloquently. One line from his speech really stands out.
I know the one you're talking about.
We're better than this.
Yeah.
We have to be. And it starts with each of us choosing respect over resentment, dialogue over division.
Such a simple message, but so powerful.
Right.
It's like he took this whole crazy situation and flipped it on its head, turned it into a call for unity and understanding.
Exactly. And the response was incredible.
Of course,
People blown away by his maturity and his ability to turn a negative experience into something positive.
And what's amazing is how his message resonated with people across the political spectrum.
I know even some of his family's harshest critics had to acknowledge the sincerity and thoughtfulness of his words.
It's true. He managed to cut through all the noise and touch on something deeper, something that people were really craving.
Yeah.
Of course, the airline faced a ton of backlash.
Their initial apology fell flat, and they had to issue a much more comprehensive one, acknowledging they could have handled things better.
And then the flight attendant resigned, taking responsibility for her role in the escalation.
This whole situation is a classic example of groupthink.
Oh, tell me more.
It's where individuals conform to the perceived norms of the group, even when those norms might be misguided.
Right.
The pressure on the flight attendant to enforce a rule, even if it wasn't clearly stated, likely played a role in her actions.
That's a great point. It highlights the power of social dynamics and how easily we can get caught up in situations that escalate beyond our control.
And what's really interesting is that Barron actually issued a statement wishing the flight attendant well,
Wow.
emphasizing learning from mistakes. Talk about taking the high road. It really shows a remarkable level of maturity and compassion, especially in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
It really reinforces his message of empathy and understanding, even towards people who might have wronged him. And here's where it gets really interesting. His speech starts getting used in schools and organizations
Oh, wow.
as an example of conflict resolution and dialogue.
That's amazing. It's fascinating how his words kind of transcended the immediate incident and became this catalyst for broader conversations about tolerance and respectful disagreement.
Right.
It speaks to the power of authentic communication and that hunger for positive examples, especially in a world that feels dominated by so much negativity.
Yeah, it's like his story, whether it's completely true or embellished a little bit,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It tapped into this collective desire for something hopeful, something positive.
Yeah.
But then he does something really interesting.
What's that?
He steps back from the spotlight,
Really?
declines further interviews,
Yeah.
focuses on quiet acts of service like volunteering, and lets his actions speak louder than words.
It's a powerful statement in itself.
It is.
Like refusing to be defined by this one event or to capitalize on the attention
Right.
suggests a genuine desire to make a positive impact rather than seeking fame or personal gain.
Yeah. And it reminds us that sometimes the most impactful actions are the quietest ones.
So true.
And the impact is undeniable. I mean, the incident and Barron's response sparked all these discussions about tolerance, respect, the importance of dialogue in a divided world.
Yeah.
It's like he accidentally started a national conversation about something we all struggle with.
Right.
How to disagree respectfully
Right.
and find common ground, even when we have different opinions.
Even though that initial buzz eventually died down, the story left a lasting impression.
It did.
Became a kind of cultural touchstone, a reminder that even when we disagree, we can choose empathy over animosity, understanding over judgment.
This reminds me of how social media has become like a battleground for shaping narratives.
Oh, yeah.
We see it all the time, right?
All the time.
A single event or image can be interpreted in so many different ways depending on people's beliefs and biases.
Now, it makes you wonder what seemingly ordinary events in our own lives might have the potential to spark these kinds of meaningful conversations.
That's a really good question. It is something to think about.
Definitely.
Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. And this story, regardless of its factual accuracy, provides a framework for navigating those challenging conversations.
Before we wrap up, there's one final detail that really stuck with me. It's a quote from one of the passengers on that flight.
Oh, I think I remember this one.
They said, "Barron didn't just leave that plane with his hat on, he left with his head high." And he reminded all of us to think a little harder before judging someone for what they wear or who they are.
That quote really captures the essence of this whole story.
It does.
Speaks to the power of individual action, staying true to oneself, and the ripple effect that even small acts of courage and compassion can have.
It makes me wonder, could this whole story, with its unique perspective and almost fictionalized elements, serve as a parable for our times?
That's a fascinating thought. It could be a reminder that even seemingly simple situations can contain profound lessons about how we navigate differences and engage in meaningful dialogue.
It encourages us to look beyond those surface-level judgments and engage with each other with more empathy and understanding.
I like that.
It gives us all a lot to think about.
It does.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into this really captivating story, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think it's this. The next time you find yourself in a situation where perspectives clash or emotions run high, remember this story. Remember the power of calm, respectful dialogue, the importance of understanding different viewpoints, and the possibility of turning even the most divisive encounters into opportunities for growth and connection.
That's such a valuable reminder, especially in today's world.
It is.
We may not always agree with each other, but we can always choose to engage with respect and a willingness to understand.
Well said.
Thanks for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive. It's been an enlightening journey.
It has been my pleasure.